Thanks, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anytime we're looking at a competition issue, I'm always interested in how it affects consumers. And representing my state as I do, I'm always concerned about how things affect Utahns. Utahns have suffered to a particularly acute degree as a result of the rampant inflation that has resulted from excessive federal spending. Since the beginning of last year, Utahns have seen their monthly expenses go up more than $700 a month. Just their ordinary monthly expenses. We're talking $8,400 plus per year just to buy the same basket of goods and services that they were purchasing before, but it's all more expensive now. So whenever approaching this or any other topic in the competition phase, I'm looking at how this would affect them, how it does affect them, and what, if anything, we ought to do about it. And with that in mind, Mr. Sheedy, let's start with you. There are those who have argued that it's anti-competitive, cartel behavior for banks through the Visa and MasterCard networks to get together and collectively agree that they're all going to charge the same interchange fees to merchants. What's your response to that?
Senator, Visa sets the interchange fees, these default interchange fees that pass from merchants acquiring banks to issuing banks. We do that on our own. We don't do that with, we certainly do it with input from the marketplace. The impact that the pandemic has had on merchants has been really important to us. At the front end of the pandemic, we lowered rates for supermarkets, restaurants, and education merchants. More recently, 90% of the merchants in the system will receive a 10% reduction in the rates that they process. What's really important, I think I'd like to stress, is we are not raising rates. The average rate in our system for Visa credit has been flat since 2015.
No, I get that, and I've got a limited time. I just want to be clear what I'm asking. I'm asking you to respond specifically to the charge that it amounts to cartel behavior to agree to charge the same interchange fees.
We disagree, Senator. The setting of a default interchange fee we feel is highly competitive in the ways in which it delivers the same interchange fee to thousands of financial institutions that then go into the marketplace on behalf of consumers and merchants and compete and innovate. So we feel that the model works very well in a system where you need tens of thousands of banks supporting millions of cardholders and millions of merchants. There's no way to operate the system other than setting a default interchange fee.
For there to be a network effect, in other words, you need the network effect in order for your system to work.
In order for there to be a coordination of activity where consumers can transact from a card that's issued by a credit union in Utah with a merchant in New York online or in person, you need to have a default interchange fee so that you know how the economic flows are going to work. And having that be the same interchange fee, irrespective of the size of the financial institution, promotes competition.
Mr. Kander, what's your response to that?
Yeah, my response is, one, they don't need to do that. I submitted with my testimony an article from NYU economist Nicholas Economides, who's pointed out that because of the concentration in the market, both on the issuing side and on the acquiring merchant side, that just 90 contracts would cover 72% of all the credit card volume. Those big banks could easily set their own prices. You don't need that going on, and there's been much more concentration since then. The other thing I would note is that having the same fees does not promote level playing field competition on the bank side either. John Blum from the Community Bankers testified previously before Congress in hearings that their costs per transaction, because they're a smaller institution, were much higher than the largest banks. But if you lock them into the same prices on higher costs, of course, they're not going to be able to compete in the same way. And those large banks have won over a lot of those small bank customers into the credit card market, which is why credit cards is so much more concentrated than debit cards as a result of that.
Mr. Kim, go with me, and if you want to respond to this, that's great too, but I was also going to ask you separately, What would happen to credit card rewards in a universe in which you imagine that there's suddenly an alternative network through which merchants could process transactions?
So the interchange pays for, I think, roughly 60% of interchange revenue goes out in the form of rewards. And I do believe it goes, not just to the wealthy. Everybody loves the rewards. I think it's a much more broadly distributed value that people of all socioeconomic classes find. And in debit, there were debit rewards before the laws changed, and those debit rewards largely went away because interchange helped subsidize those things. So you would see those rewards go away. And furthermore, you would see banks of my size and smaller and maybe even somewhat larger. The economics of issuing credit cards, it's not what it once was. There's lots of competition. It's harder to do. The big banks, I mean, it's interesting to come back to the last question. Yeah, maybe you could cover, maybe, I don't even know that I agree that the largest banks could negotiate with all the millions of merchants and set the interchange. But if they could, that would just put me out because I can't.
Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired. I've got one follow-up question I want to ask on that. Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying the banks would still get paid for that transaction, but get paid less, and likely rewards programs would be a casualty of them. There might be something left of them. There might not.
Yeah, I would, depending on the rate, I assume we'd get paid. Yeah.
Okay, so if that's the case, couldn't one argue that this is a manifestation of lack of competition, and that the price is being artificially inflated by lack of competition? The consumer rewards provide a means of sharing in the monopoly, in the monopoly rents, you might say, in order to inflate demand and squeeze merchants. What's your response to that?
The purpose of rewards is not to squeeze merchants. The purpose of rewards is so that you have a value proposition that makes people want to use your card. And the competition, the reward space is an intensely competitive space. And again, it's hard for a bank my size to compete with the likes of Chase that strikes a deal with Southwest Airlines. Perhaps that continues. It wouldn't be as rich. But again, it kind of puts me out.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Lee. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to you and the ranking member for convening this conversation today. I am glad to see that on this panel we have